Welcome to Fierce Feminine Leadership, the success podcast for women in business. Each week, we feature interviews and advice to help you step into your power and lead your way. Now here's your host, women's leadership expert, Eleanor Beaton.
Hello, this is Eleanor Beaton, and you are listening to Fierce Feminine Leadership, the success podcast for ambitious women in business. And this is episode number 39. And today, we're talking about the fact that we're tired of hearing from everybody else. We're ready to hear from you. Now, this episode was really inspired by a conversation that I had with a woman named Allison. She booked a call with me and we were speaking, and she was telling me a little bit about her experience and her past. And she was also asking me about how I decided to create the format of my podcast, how I decided to create a show that has some interviews and then some shows where I'm kind of sharing insight and doing training and teaching as well. And my thought process with respect to that was that I definitely wanted to be bringing in training and insight and stories from fierce women in business that I have access to, that I want to speak to, that I want to share with you, my faithful listeners. But there was something else very intentional in terms of why I decided to set the format that it's typically, one interview per week and then 2 mini trainings that I do, that I share each week. And it really has to do with this. In Tara Moore's book, Playing Big, she talks about one of the ways in which women play small. And a very typical way in which we play small is curating knowledge or curating other people's stories and expertise versus leading with our own. And this is something that I believe to be rampant. When I was researching this particular podcast and looking at the market and seeing what was available, when I looked at a lot of the top podcasts hosted by women, they were almost exclusively 100% interviews. And while I love the interview format, look, I was a business journalist. I cut my teeth interviewing people on radio and for magazine. I adore the art of the interview. But I think it's really important as women in business that we lead with our own voices, that we share our own insights, and that we step up, we take the mic, do a great job, and then drop the mic. We don't start by dropping the mic or sharing it or handing it over to hear from somebody else if we're not making room for our own voice. Now, I've mentioned this before on the podcast, but having spoken to conference organizers about this, when you go outside the realm of a women's focused business conference, I attend a lot of women's focused business conferences, and in those conferences, it's very typical to have lots of women speakers. But when you start to move into mainstream conferences, it is actually rare to find women keynotes. There are a lot of male speakers out there, even though when you look at a lot of conferences, the majority of attendees are often women because, it's a generalization, but it holds up that we love to learn. Another generalization that often holds up is that we are great teachers, but we are not necessarily stepping out and using our voice. So when I created this podcast, I made the intention and decision to make sure that I'm using my voice here on my platform as a way to invite you to step up and use your voice on your platform. I see brilliant women asking great questions, highlighting the stories and expertise and insights of other people, and sometimes standing too far backstage. My invitation to you, if you are really ready to play a bigger game in your industry, in your business, in your nonprofit, is that you need to start using your voice. You've got to quit paving the way for other people to tell their stories all the time. You've got to start telling your own story. You've got to get your space and time on air. And when I say on air, I mean that quite literally if you decide you want to do a podcast, but also figuratively. If you are in a situation at a meeting, if you are pitching for business as part of a team, you've got to make sure that your voice is being heard. So that is my invitation. Stop taking the back seat. Stop curating other people's stories and messages. That's a great strategy when you're starting to work with new material, if you're making a transition into a new industry and you're trying to feel your way around. I started as a journalist and I interviewed a ton of great business people. And then I moved into really building my business myself. And now it's my opportunity to take the platform that I've built and not just to hand it over to other people, but to use it myself to share my voice. I want you to do the same. I want you to be conscious of all the times in your business and your life that you're allowing other people to speak for you or handing over the figurative or literal mic. Time for you to speak up. We need to hear your story. We want to hear your story. We're curious about your story. So why are you holding it back? Thank you so much for listening. I adore you, my faithful listeners. It is so incredible to have this podcast, to hear your comments on LinkedIn, on Twitter. I really appreciate it. I read every single one. If you haven't subscribed to the podcast and left a review yet, please do. It means so much to me. And it also helps spread the word to women who haven't heard of this very fierce podcast. So I encourage you to do that. And until next time, thank you for being faithful listeners. And of course, stay fierce.
Thank you for listening to Fierce Feminine Leadership. Be sure to head over to iTunes and subscribe to the show. While you're there, leave us a fierce review. When you leave a review, your name is automatically entered into a monthly draw. Each month, we'll draw one reviewer to automatically receive a private coaching session with women's leadership expert Eleanor Beaton. So remember, head over to iTunes and subscribe to the show. Then leave us a review for your chance to win a private coaching session with Eleanor Beaton. Go to eleanorbeatonpodcast.com and sign up to get your free cheat sheet, the 5 critical leadership skills of 7-figure businesswomen. This free download will help you diagnose the exact skills you need to see major growth in your business and career. Head over to eleanorbeatonpodcast.com and get your free download today.